Daesh may have been driven out of northern Syria, but fighting along the border is far from over. The United States says it wants to protect gains in the predominantly Kurdish region. Their plan is to launch and train a new border security force, mainly made up of members of the SDF, an alliance of Kurdish and Arab militia. But Turkey sees the force as a threat. Among its fighters are members of the YPG, a group Ankara considers an offshoot of the PKK terror group.
Müttefikimiz dediğimiz bir ülke tüm itirazlarımıza, tüm ikazlarımıza, tüm iyi niyetli telkinlerimize rağmen sınırlarımız boyunca bir terör ordusu kurmakta ısrar ediyor. Türkiye sınırı boyunca kurulacak bir terör yapılanmasının Türkiye'den başka bir hedefi olabilir mi?
Russia is also concerned the U.S. wants to secure a permanent stake in Syria. Last August, an SDF defector also said he believes the U.S. has a strategy policy for decades to come. There will be military, economic, and political agreements in the long term between the leadership of Syria's northern areas and the U.S. administration. On Saturday, the Turkish army sent tanks into the Syrian province of Afrin and began shelling YPG targets. But these moves just seem to be the start of a bigger military operation to push YPG forces back from Turkey's border. As NATO allies, Turkey and the U.S. have shared strategic interests for decades, especially in the fight against terrorism and Daesh. But a string of disputes have strained the friendship. Turkey is demanding that the U.S. hand over Fethullah Gulen, the man accused of orchestrating a failed coup in 2016. Last year, Turkish security guards were indicted for attacking demonstrators during a visit by President Erdogan to Washington. Later, a Turkish worker at the U.S. consulate in Istanbul was arrested, sparking travel bans and visa restrictions between the two countries. A U.S. court has now found a Turkish banker at the state-controlled Halkbank guilty of helping Iran evade U.S. sanctions. Now, observers fear the U.S. and Turkey have drawn new battle lines in Syria, sinking an already fragile alliance and complicating the chances of a political solution to Syria's long and devastating war. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now here in studio by Matthew Breiser. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. From Washington, D.C., we have Lawrence Korb. He's the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense. And completing our panel from Çilvegözü on the Turkey-Syria border is Bora Bayraktar. He's a professor of international relations at Istanbul Kültür University. Thanks all of you for joining us. Lawrence Korb, let me begin with you. So this border security force trained by the U.S., which includes heavily the YPG, led in many ways by the YPG, which is the sister organization of a listed terror organization, the PKK. Why does Washington think this is a good idea now?
Well, there are two reasons. Number one, the United States wants to prevent ISIS from coming back in. And as we've shown up to now, it has been this force, the so-called SDF, or Syrian Democratic Forces, that have been successful in beating ISIS in Kobani and Raqqa. The other is they want a force to protect the thousands of Syrians who fled the attacks by Assad and the Russians so that they will not be attacked if Assad comes back with the Russian help and takes control of those areas again.
Okay, so Bora Bayraktar, this is the rationale. You need to sometimes help one group of maybe not so great people in order to fight a greater evil, and that's what Washington is doing because ultimately they're fighting Daesh. Do you buy that?
No, I don't think anybody buys that, especially in this country, in Turkey, because we know that the PYD-held areas are under under great pressure of the PYD organization. Many Arabs, many Turkomans, and even opponent Kurds are under great pressure of PYD. So they are using the American support to hold the power in this area. And also we should say that an average IQ person can easily understand that this PYD is, as you said, sister organization of PKK, which is listed as a terrorist organization, especially after what happened in Raqqa offense, after they occupied Raqqa. You know, they opened photos of Öcalan, who is the leader of PKK, imprisoned in Turkey. So this is not a convincing idea, and nobody buys it in Turkey.
Matthew Breiser, there's a sense of betrayal here in Turkey because you have people saying, but what happened in the White House back in May? The U.S. promised President Erdogan this won't happen. What's going on? Yeah, well, not only that happened, but the day that Operation Euphrates Shield began a year ago on August 24th, then Vice President Biden also said that the YPG will have to move back east of the Euphrates, and a couple of days later, Brett McGurk, the U.S. envoy to defeating ISIS, he said no, they won't have to move back east of the Euphrates. So what that says to me is there's a bureaucratic battle going on in Washington. One side of the equation, Central Command, is still angry about March 1st, 2003 vote of the Turkish parliament not to allow the U.S. to invade Iraq via Turkey. I think they're also disappointed from their perspective that Turkey didn't offer as many forces as the U.S. would have liked to attack Raqqa. So that's one side. On the other hand, there's a European command and people who care about the strategic value of Turkey within the various bureaucracies in the U.S. who have a different view. And I think these two things are playing, those right. points of view are playing themselves out. And if a U.S. official had to tell you, well, you know, sometimes we have to arm Stalin to, or support Stalin to defeat Hitler and so on, this is what we do, this is politics. Yeah, I grew up in a different U.S. foreign policy establishment. And I was very active, as I say, back in the Bush W administration and the preparations for the war in Iraq. And our doctrine then, which has usually been the U.S. doctrine, is that there are no good terrorists, there are only bad terrorists. Because they work with us doesn't mean that they're okay. Or put it differently, the doctrine was any country that provides safe haven to a terrorist organization is as guilty as the terrorists. Right. Lawrence Korb, is it worth dismantling the relationship with Turkey in order to get this done from the U.S. perspective?
Well, the U.S.-Turkey relations have been strained for quite a while. So, in terms of Turkey's relationship with Russia, I also think it's important that the U.S. does not want to put ground forces into Syria, and this is the best way to avoid that. And I think that's what the U.S. is looking. They don't want to antagonize Turkey, and most of the people in the administration who support this proposal do not think that the YPG is going to work with the PKK to undermine Turkey or to use this to create more terrorism in Turkey. Their feeling is that they will be the ones to prevent ISIS from coming back and to prevent those people who have, as I said, fled Assad. Remember, Turkey's goal was to get rid of Assad. They've changed that goal now, too. So I think a lot of people have changed the goals. They think they need to work together. And I think if they communicate, properly, right, Turkey will not feel that this is a threat to them. Yeah, and Mr. Korb, I know you're saying this is what they're thinking, but tell me what you think. What do you think? Do you think that if the border is secured by this force and afterwards we have, say, the YPG, which is rampant, they're flush with U.S. weapons and U.S. training, you think they're going to hand back the weapons to the United States and not give it to the PKK across the border? Is that your thinking? Well, I think we have the special forces in there to make sure that, that happens. Can you guarantee it? No, but I do think they've already been armed. I mean, we armed them to fight ISIS, and without them, ISIS would still be a viable force in that area, and I think they need credit for doing that. If, in fact, they wanted to do what you said, they could have done that a while ago rather than fight ISIS. Bora Bayraktar, if they wanted to give the weapons to the PKK, the insurgency in the southeast would have flared up in the past couple of years. They're using it to fight ISIS. That's the argument.
I think the real issue from the United States perspective, they are looking for a foothold in the region, especially after what happened in Iraq. It was a disaster for the U.S. They lost 5,000 men and prestige. I think the United States sees the Sunni triangle in Iraq and also east of Syria as a permanent threat to U.S. plans and the idea of dominating the Middle East region. So for this reason, I think United States is looking for a place and they are trying to build a garrison state under their full control. And I think PYD is the main actor, the local actor, which would enable the US to achieve this goal. This is the plan that it seems to me actually what's going on here, because Turkey as an ally... Yeah.
Right, let's ask Larry Korb. Is the US trying to create a garrison state in a region where it's losing control?
No, I don't think so. The United States would love to get out of there. I mean, President Trump, when he campaigned, said he was against nation building. He wanted to accelerate the process that Obama had started by putting in a few more troops and relaxing the rules of engagement. But no, he doesn't. The United States doesn't want a permanent force in that area at all. President Trump was opposed to the invasion of Iraq. So if it was up to him, we'd be out of there. And I think once we can be sure that ISIS has been under control, the United States will even withdraw some of the special forces that it has there.
Let's have a little listen to what the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had to say, because the Russians have been wading in. Let's have a listen.
The announcement that this zone will be controlled by US-backed groups, by a force of up to 30,000 people, this is a very serious issue, which causes concern that a course was set for the partition of Syria.
Matthew Breiser, you surprised at all by the Russian position, which is seemingly siding with Turkey here?
Not at all, but the Russian position aims to sow discord and to create a rift between the U.S. and Turkey, which has been Russian foreign policy in this region for quite some time. The reality is, based on some extremely high-level discussions I've had in the last few weeks in Washington at the ministerial level, both current and former, there really is a sensitivity in Washington of the need to help Turkey make the right choices and work together with the United States in northern Syria. Put it differently, there's a desire to find out what it is specifically Turkey would want the U.S. to do to defang the YPG, to prevent it from being integrated with the PKK, and therefore together to find a way to stabilize northern Syria, including Afrin.
Bora Bayraktar, an Afrin attack seems imminent, and maybe Manbij and so on after that. How likely is it that we're going to see Turkey and the United States clash on the battlefield?
I don't think this is going to happen, especially considering Afrin is very far from the Euphrates River. I think the United States is more concerned about east part of the Euphrates River, and the coalition just said, you know, we don't have operations in Afrin. So it seems that they are not going to be there. So Turkish forces will not see any U.S. Military personnel in Afrin. But if things goes on, there is, I think, more opportunity or more risk for Turkey to clash with Russian forces in Afrin, and this is the main issue, and which will more complicate the problem here.
Matthew Breiser, is the Afrin attack, when it happens, if it happens, is it justified?
I think it is justified. Of course it is. Turkey is a sovereign state with serious national security concerns along its border. I also think it's an opportunity, going back to what I was saying at the end. Precisely what Mr. Bayraktar was saying is why. U.S. forces are not planning to operate in Afrin, but U.S. government would like to see stability in Afrin established in a way that protects Turkey. So maybe Turkey can request some form of U.S. assistance in terms of training or weaponry for let's say, FSA forces that will be operating in Afrin.
Okay, so Lawrence Korb, might there be a silver lining to all of this, with Turkey getting U.S. consent when it comes to maybe Afrin, Manbij, and so on?
Yeah, I think there is. We have had our, as the ambassador has pointed out, we've had our disagreements with Turkey over the years, but eventually we do work out the things. And I think this highlights what's going to happen in Syria now that basically ISIS has been pushed out. What is the future of Syria? Will it be a federal state? How long will Assad remain in power? How much influence will the Russians and the Iranians, which we haven't even talked about, how much influence are they going to have there? And I think Turkey and the U.S. are on the same page there, not wanting to have Russia or Iran dominate the area.
Matthew Breiser, is it Is it just something that the U.S. has to get used to, that Turkey has options these days?
Yeah, I think of course it's something the US has to
Russia,
get used to.
Iran, whoever.
Sure, but I think that fundamentally, from a strategic perspective, Turkey's leadership realizes being left alone with Russia and Iran in the Middle East is not somewhere Turkey wants to be. Life is a lot better if the U.S. is your partner, and the YPG isn't going to die. It's not going away. Either the Russians will manipulate the YPG to Russia's advantage, which will not be in Turkey's interests, or Turkey and the U.S. can work together to manage the YPG problem. I think that's the way things are moving.
Yeah, Bora, for those who feel that relations between the two countries are getting very close to the point of no return, from this possibly on the battlefield on Turkey's border in northern Syria, to the courts in New York City, to Turkey wanting a man in the Poconos. Those who believe that this is just, it's hitting a point where both are going to regret it after a while and the whole relationship's going to fall apart, do they have a strong case? Are we getting into dangerous territory?
Yes, I think we are coming closer to a make or break point in Turkish-US alliance, because in many major issues from Turkish perspective, national security issues, Turkey doesn't see US helping her or supporting Turkey. You know, when it comes to Turkish territorial integrity, Turkey's war on terror, the military coup attempt, the initiators of this military coup attempt, the FETÖ movement, you know, they are based in the United States. So these are major issues, and not only Turkish government, but Turkish people feel that US is no longer friend of Turkey. So I think many people in the government, in the street, are reviewing its decision about US, and I think Turkey is moving away from the United States. Maybe it's same for US. Maybe American friends can talk about that in major issues. There are many disagreements, but I think at the end, United States is losing a very important, very key ally in the southern flank of NATO. And, you know, Russians are coming down. Russia is now in Mediterranean. They are in Crimea. They are controlling Syria. And now S-400s will be based on Turkey. So I think this is a great strategic loss for the United States.
Lawrence Korb, does the U.S. need to work harder to keep Turkey as a friend?
Well, I think so. But again, remember that this is not the U.S. fault. For example, trying to extradite, you know, Gulen, who's the person living in the Poconos, our court said there was no, you know, reason for that. I mean, we have a separation of powers, and it's not up to the president. You know, there was no real evidence presented. And this idea that somehow or another, you know, we were responsible for the attempted coup is just nonsense. I think the real problem is that Erdogan, you know, is taking more and more power and acting more and more, you know, out of line in terms of not trying to deal with these things. After all, he never complained when with the Syrian Democratic Forces were fighting in Kobani and Raqqa. I mean, if they had not done that, can you imagine how bad the situation would be on Turkey's border?
All right, okay, so Larry Korb sees it as, you know, predominantly Turkey's fault here, that the relationship is being hurt. A year ago, Matthew Bryza, people said that Trump and Erdogan seemed to be natural allies, and this was an opportunity for a fresh start. 1 year on, since Trump assumed the presidency, let me ask you if Trump has a Turkey policy.
No, I don't believe he has a Turkey policy. In fact, I don't believe he generally has a systematic policy on much of anything. I mean, I think the bureaucracy is running on its own with some great leadership, Secretary Mattis, decent leadership from Secretary Tillerson. No, I don't think President Trump has a Turkey policy. I don't think he's very aware of the issues at play, to be honest with you. I think he felt some sort of an emotional bond with President Erdogan. He wants to get along. But I think the whole problem here, as we talked about a couple of iterations ago, is that you get this inconsistency in U.S. policy. One day, the president or someone else in the White House says, we're not going to arm the YPG. The next day, someone else contradicts that. Yeah. You need presidential leadership to set the rules.
Yeah, interesting times in northern Syria, and we'll be watching it closely to see if there is indeed an attack on Afrin and beyond. But for the moment, I've got to move on. Lawrence Korb, Bora Bayraktar, and Matthew Bryza, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.